Hello and welcome to the Bald and Bloviating Podcast. I am your bald host, Mookie Spitz, and today I'm bloviating about my recent novel, Jonnie, Fazoolie, and the Transfinite Reality Engine. People who are reading the novel are asking me questions. People who have read the novel are asking me questions. So I thought I would take a tour of the novel as if an English professor at the University of Iowa were teaching the course on Jonnie, Fazoolie, and the Transfinite Reality Engine, but I will keep it frisky and fresh, less like a course in English writing and literature, and more like a Jonnie Fazoolie for Dummies episode. I was going to call this podcast Jonnie Fazoolie for Dummies, but that sounds pretty condescending to you, dear listener, and I would probably get sued by the Dummies people because I believe it's a copyrighted title or franchise. So consider this the audio annotated Jonnie Fazoolie and the Transfinite Reality Engine. I am going to cover off on the essences of the book, and I'll probably follow up with a bunch of podcasts, double clicking, as it were, into various aspects of the book to provide more detail and more info, especially as additional questions come in. So here we go. The book is episodes 1 through 6 of what I'm calling the Lover's Guide to the Infiniverse. So imagine this series like Game of Thrones, and Jonnie Fazoolie and the Transfinite Reality Engine is the first book in the series. It's like Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, which led into the Chamber of Secrets and the Prisoner of Azkaban. I'm going to have more books in the series which chronologically follow Jonnie Fazoolie in the same way J.K. Rowling followed Harry Potter. So thus the Lover's Guide house, if you will, and the individual stories flow from there. I'm anticipating 5 books total, but I tend to keep writing and writing, so not sure where I'm going to land with the total. Most of the story is already mapped out. The first 3 books in detail, then it gets a little bit more ambiguous, and I kind of like that. The folks who brought us Breaking Bad, for example, you can tell they were making it up as they went along, at least certain parts of certain episodes. Almost like they filled something deliberately so wild as to just get your attention riveted on screen, and then they would create that as almost a challenge for themselves as screenwriters to get the story out of that dilemma in a way that made sense and drove the story forward. I haven't done that yet, and I don't plan on it yet. I'm not accountable to that kind of heavy schedule. Maybe I should be, but long story longer, I've got it worked out. About 5 books in the Lover's Guide to the Infiniverse, of which this book is the first one. And this book consists of 6 episodes. Episodes 1 through 6. Consider these master chapters, if you will. And within each episode, I broke things down into sections. And each section is deliberately under 10 pages long. Now, they vary from the shortest section of maybe about 4 pages or so, 5 pages, to I believe the longest one is about 10 pages. And this was deliberate, so it's chunky content. There's a Hungarian writer who wrote what he called 8-minute stories. And his goal was to keep every story under 8 minutes of reading, which might or might not correspond to toilet time. There you have it. You can sit on your throne. You can get from here to there. And in the case of my audio podcasts, you can listen on the No Hair, All Heart podcast show, another one of my podcast shows, where I am literally and figuratively, literally reading the book out loud. And I'm trying to do the character voices and capture some of the emotion. And no, I'm not a professional reader, and a professional reader would no doubt do a much better job, but at least you get the author's interpretation of his own stuff through the mechanism of his unpolished, unprofessional, or shall I say non-professional reading. But I'm having fun, so it's another way you could check it out. You can, of course, buy the book, download the Kindle. If you got unlimited, it's free for you. And you can even go to Twitter at Jonnie Fazoolie, and I'm literally tweeting out the entire book, paragraph by paragraph, line of dialogue by line of dialogue, each and every hour on the hour, 24 hours a day, 6 days a week, resting on the Lord's Day, Sunday, which was actually an accident. I was loading up the scheduler in Publer as a batch file, and I'm a little, ADHD, and I missed Sunday. So I already loaded up the batch file, and it's already cranking. I said, oh, Jesus, I missed Sunday. And then I realized Sunday is a great day to take a break and also load up the Jonnie Fazoolie Twitter feed with the audio podcast from the week and other Jonnie Fazoolie news and updates. So a fortuitous error. I try to consider most errors in my life fortuitous, which you might say is a defense mechanism, my way of being avoidant to my problems, or at least rationalizing them. But I like to look at it as the glass half full, as it were, and in this case, full of errors, of which that was one of them. Thus, the 6 days a week of tweets and 1 day of just throwing Jonnie stuff out there. Why not? Anyway, where was I? I was telling you about the 6 episodes of the first book in the series. Now, each of these episodes is named with a B word. You've got episode 1, The Birth, then The Bet, The Band, The Brand, The Boilerplate, and The Blowout. In the original draft, I had only 2 sections, and it was part 1 and part 2. And then I was thinking more about the story, and the story kept expanding. I got more room to move. I wanted to make it more readable and chunkier and accessible. So what began as The Bet, part 1, and The Brand, part 2, actually in the original draft, it had The Build, part 3. So this book, as it existed only a few months before I finally published it, actually had Jonnie building the device. So once again, spoiler alert, as I mentioned at the beginning of this podcast is for people who have already read the book, are reading the book, or you don't really give a shit and you just want to hear me rant about the book. So spoiler alert, this is the last time I'm going to say spoiler alert because I'm giving away the show here. Anyway, the original draft of this book included Jonnie and Casey, the scientist, actually building the Transfinite reality engine and then it working. So the end of this book was the functionality, the demonstration of the functionality of the device. Jonnie being hurled into another universe, and the denouement was going on the date with the scientist to collect his bet. So that said, I had 3 parts in the original draft. I had the bet, the brand, and the build. And I liked the alliteration of those. I thought it was cool. And it also reminded me, perhaps originally unconsciously and then consciously, of the hunting of the snark, which is an absolutely wonderful rhymed poem book by Lewis Carroll, the daddy of Alice, Alice Adventures in Wonderland, and Alice Through the Looking Glass. There was also a follow-up that no one's ever heard about, a big book that Lewis Carroll did, kind of a sequel to these classic two, which was a dud. But the Hunting of the Snark is not a dud. It's an absolutely brilliant, timeless piece of absurdist Elizabethan Victorian writing. And each of the parts kind of start with B, and then the characters have B's. It's all alliterative. The butcher, the baker, the banker, etc. Are characters in that. They're all hunting the snark, by the way. And I just love the B's. So there you have the B's, episodes 1 through 6. And I call them episodes because if there's any chance of my narrative being repurposed into a graphic novel, a comic book, a movie, a mini series, you got content hunters out there, and content hunters like packaged content. They have a mountain of stuff to sift through. So when you open up Jonnie, Fazoolie, and the Transfinite Reality Engine, the first thing you see are episodes. So nudge, nudge, wink, wink. Turn my book into a Netflix miniseries. You're welcome. You'll love it. So that's the setup here. Now, in broad strokes, episode 1 introduces the main characters, most of them, and sets up more or less what's going on here, especially their problems vis-a-vis Jonnie Fazoolie, who is dead-ass broke, scrambling to keep himself afloat, being pursued both in his mind and in reality by debt collectors and lawyers and everyone who is really hunting him down because he is a two-bit con man and hustler, and not a very good one at that. And then it morphs into episode 2, The Bet, which is the idea for creating the Transfinite Reality Engine and everything that ensues. And then once he gets that, then he needs to recruit his team to build it. That's episode 4, The Brand. After he puts together the band, then he needs to figure out the brand. And then episode 5 is the machinations that go from the team coming together and more or less knowing what they're doing and then encountering a bunch of issues. And the boilerplate is the foundation of the ideas and the relationships between the principal characters moving forward in the series. It's a boilerplate that describes their foundation in terms of their personalities and in terms of their dynamics moving forward with the whole series. And then the blowout is another multi-meaning, punny kind of word where there's a huge party at the end, a huge event, which literally ends in a blowout. And there are blowouts in many, many different ways. And in classic Hollywood form, you take the hero, you build him up slowly, he peaks in terms of his power, and then you punch him in the face with a crushing defeat, only to bring him back in droves. And since this is a series, I don't follow that completely. You don't get the whole triptych of introduction, development, and crash and rebirth. You literally end with a crash. But the good news here is that it's not for naught. A lot happens between episode 1 and 6, especially in terms of the characters and their interpersonal relationships with each other. And what I'm really doing is I'm setting up what will be called Team Eternity. So Jonnie and Bessina, the German scientist, to a certain extent, Penny Pitts, and variations of Dr. Casey Floyd will be part of this team assigned to save reality itself, which I think is a good segue to the overall theme of this novel. Now, most science fiction novels, almost all of them, to me, limit themselves in terms of the level of excitement that they can engender, at least by way of their goals or the aspirations of the good guys and bad guys. You'll have science fiction novels that focus on saving humanity from the alien invasion. Okay, that's the three-body problem kind of setup in essence. And then you got Star Wars, good old Star Wars, where Darth Vader wants Luke to join him to overthrow the Emperor and rule the galaxy. So it seems the galaxy is at stake in Star Wars, which is, pretty impressive. 100,000 light years or so across, 13 billion years old. A lot of stuff in a galaxy. That's pretty good. Way better than just planet Earth and us. And then you've had other science fiction series that might go so far as to want to rule the universe. That is a real stretch right there. And if you look at some of the Avengers movies and this obsession with the multiverse, well, you're getting a hint at ruling reality. And it's become a trope where the multiverse is a thing, and then the bad guys are ruling the multiverse. So that's kind of cool too. And you've really exponentially boosted the stakes. So I'm going for this multiverse thing. I'm going for the big kahuna, the whole deal. But I'm trying to go even deeper than that. And I'm talking about reality, capital R. Everything and every time, so to speak, just the totality of everything, the isness of existence itself. I want to be at stake here. And it doesn't seem like it when you're getting into this book, and that's deliberate. I wanted to start with real world situations, people on Earth, people in this universe, and I wanted to intersperse it with more fantastic, overtly science fiction-y kind of descriptions and characters and situations that are clearly someplace else. But give it in terms of hints and clues and little vignettes and dreams this early on in the series. That was my intent. And that's what I did in this first book. In the original draft of the first book, there was no Creole Banzai, the spider who invents the ultimate simulator. There's no Quartz Leibniz, the managing director of the all-powerful agency. He wasn't in this. Certainly not Grand Admiral Xavier Xerxes of the Quintillion and First Hyper Trooper Division. I didn't have four-dimensional characters in the original draft, and I didn't have two-dimensional creatures, and I didn't have a raging interdimensional civil war. I didn't have any of this shit. I just had Jonnie Fazoolie, this hustler who's trying to hustle people out of money by building this fanciful, insane invention, and the invention, wow, actually working. Surprise! That was it. But again, I just felt I was missing some opportunities. I couldn't wait to get into some of the science fiction elements, and I threw all that shit in there too. And I'm happy I did because it worked out really, really fun. I like this book, can you tell? I've been writing for decades, and I've never been this excited about anything I've written. I think the thing that comes closest is Greg's Gift, which is a novella that's on Medium that I will eventually turn into a book because I'm going to write part 2 of Greg's Gift. And it's a very autobiographical Romana Clay style novella of my adventures in the 90s in Chicago. And Greg's Gift happens during a week during the weekday, and it ends right when the weekend bar shift starts. And I can't wait to turn that into a novel. That's going to happen too, but I got a lot on my plate in addition to trying to pay the rent at this point. So Greg's Gift was to me a monumental moment in my creative development. Boom, wow, I figured it out. I also got into this rhythm of writing in these block paragraphs. So people are asking me, why the hell is every paragraph in Jonnie Fazoolie 3 lines long? And the answer I've gone into on other podcasts, but suffice to say, I wanted to create that artificial limit, turn it into lyric poetry style prose, kind of prosody, because it really controlled my writing. It gamified the entire experience of writing, and I think it makes for an even more exciting read. It's like tweet, 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 tweet. And I think the book really moves at a clip. And I had to be as concise and succinct and impactful as I possibly could with these short paragraphs, boom, 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 interspersed by dialogue that was never past the 3 lines either. So Greg's Gift, 3-line paragraphs, taking real pride in my writing, setting the stakes high, episodes. Let's dive into the book itself. Now, episode 1, I'm calling The Birth. And literally, it opens with a birth. Now, a lot of people are wondering, Alice Unchained, what the fuck? Clearly, it's a pun on Alice in Chains, which was a fun band. They weren't my favorite, but I had Alice, and I figured I can make a pun out of that because she's unshackled from the limitations that you'll soon find out. In other words, just for the sake of copyright, Alice's Adventures in Wonderland is pretty much public domain, I can tell here. Written by Lewis Carroll, and I don't want to mix it up with Alice in Wonderland, the Walt Disney Corporation product thereof. So I just want to point that out, that Alice is referring to Lewis Carroll's Alice, and the descriptions of Alice as they unfold are the illustrator Tenniel in the original Alice books going back to Victorian times. You know, Lewis Carroll, as we know, was a mathematician, and he was kind of awkward. He was a bachelor, and people wonder if there's a Lolita thing going on here. Other people have remarked he's probably gay. I totally do not give a shit. But he was brilliant in terms of his absurdist writing. I've already, laid accolades on him for The Hunting of the Snark. And Alice Adventures in Wonderland was a book I was obsessed with for years. Looking Glass, the whole thing. And almost as an homage and as a fitting theme, the big bad guy in Jonnie Fazoolie and the Transfinite Reality Engine is, drumroll please, Alice. I call her Alice Void, or more properly, Creo Bonsai, the spider who has developed the jar simulator, refers to her as Alice Void. Now, to be crystal clear, the opening here is very poetic. It's very ambiguous. However, if you are aware of some of the cosmology, the science, the physics, the astrophysics of some of the terminology that I pepper in here and the descriptive text, you will recognize that Alice from my book, Alice and Jonnie Fazoolie and the Transfinite Reality Engine, is what is called a Boltzmann brain. Now, I will devote an entire podcast to what the hell a Boltzmann brain is, but suffice to say that we discovered in the late 90s that the universe, our universe, is not only expanding, we knew that for a while, but is actually accelerating in its expansion, which means the further things are out, the faster it is they're moving away from us. And this trend, this expression of outward motion is actually accelerating over time. Now, if there's no change to this, then the universe, the end of the universe, will be this freezing cold, absolutely dark, unimaginably ginormous space where every star has already burned out and every black hole, even the really big ones, have evaporated. And all that's left is this quantum soup with a temperature, and I've read different versions of this, a temperature that might be 10 to the minus 30 degrees, something crazy like that. So right now, the temperature of the universe, the temperature of the microwave background radiation is about 2 degrees Kelvin, which is about 2 degrees in Celsius terms above absolute zero, which is the total absence of any thermal energy. The whole universe, the background of the universe, on average is 2 degrees, which comes out to, for us Americans, about 452 degrees below zero. That's the temperature of space. But space has a temperature. Space not only has a temperature, but it's got background energy. And what physicists believe, this is the unity between particle physics and cosmology, where particle physics postulate that there's no such thing as nothing. There's no such thing as empty space. Empty space itself is erupting with this frothy quantum foam of particles and their antiparticles erupting out of nothing, zipping around and annihilating each other, turning themselves into more energy, which in turn creates particles and antiparticles, and so on. So the background of the universe itself is energetic, and things are coming into existence out of nothing. That's what physicists believe, folks. I'm not making this up. And what's awesome about that is, vis-a-vis this Boltzmann brain, there was a statistician and scientist named Ludwig Boltzmann in the 19th century, and he did the math on statistics and discovered that you can have regions of chaotic behavior, and by that is random behavior, and there'll be pockets of order that spontaneously erupt out of space and time. So, if you have inconceivably vast space and inconceivably vast lengths of time, things start to pop out of nothing. So, hypothetical, and I shit you not, as the universe expands hypothetically forever, and space thins out and darkens up and freezes over into this frothing quantum soup of just shit coming in and out of existence, sooner or later, anything you can imagine will spontaneously be created and then vanish. Think of anything. Your left foot, your earlobe, my copy of Jonnie Fazoolie and the Transfinite Reality Engine. It's unbelievably unlikely that any of these will pop up out of nowhere, but eventually they will. Eventually they will have to, if given an infinite amount of time. And this is, again, assuming that the acceleration continues, that the universe continues to expand, that nothing freaky happens, or that it doesn't reverse. Like maybe the mechanism that expands it will eventually slow down, stop, and it'll shrink in on itself. You'll get another big bang, and it'll cycle forever, which is part of Roger Penrose's idea. Anyway, I digress. Alice, in my book, is a Boltzmann brain. And what a Boltzmann brain is, out there in a dying universe, trillions, quadrillions, septillion, octillion, etc., light years out there in this dying universe, within this quantum frothing foam, after an equal, if not greater, number of years. So, for example, scientists think that it'll take 10 to the 100 years, the Google years, for every black hole in our universe to finally evaporate. So imagine 10 to the 10 to the 100 years. Why the hell not if it can go forever? And the idea here is, given enough time, a brain will spontaneously appear in nothing. And not only a brain, but the brain will come preloaded with a personality and memories and ideas. Now, I slightly tweak this idea, as I'll discuss later in the book, by saying that Alice doesn't spontaneously evolve out there because the chances are so low, but the conditions for Alice to evolve in something that's out there comes into existence. But anyway you look at it, Alice is a Boltzmann brain. She is a consciousness that has evolved out of nothing in a cold, dying, dark universe. And that is the background that should completely describe and even explain the opening section of Jonnie, Fazoolie and the Transfinite Reality Engine. Alice is a Boltzmann brain. That becomes hinted at in the conference scene when a scientist evolves a Boltzmann brain using NVIDIA chips and our LLM technology. So there's a section where a scientist does a demo on the evolution of cellular automata. And these constructs, these mathematical computer science constructs within a simulation, evolve generation to generation and culminate in the creation of a consciousness. And Alice hacks into that, kind of like a thematic self-referential wink. So there you have a hint as to what Alice is. And then, in case you're curious, Jonnie reads a graphic novel where I annotate it and pretty much say what I'm saying now in the damn book, and I put that in so you wouldn't be too confused in the book. And finally, in a later chapter, which is the overtly science fiction-y part of the book, Quartz Leibniz, the big guy from the agency, the evolved dinosaur-like character, literally comes out and says that they've identified Alice as an errant Boltzmann brain. So no ambiguity here. The opening is poetic. There are hints. I build up to it. But Alice is a Boltzmann brain. That's number one. Now, number two, and this is vital for the plot, Alice, while she's hanging out there, she's created, and not only did she just appear out of nowhere to disappear, but because she's evolved in that far away, far future, empty, cold space, she's got a lot of time on her hands. Alice is bored and lonely. And what happens in her boredom and loneliness is she uses her imagination to create worlds, which I described in the beginning. And then she stumbles upon two things which are central to understanding the story. The first thing that Alice stumbles into, which is lesser in this first book, is the garden. And what the garden is the way people are able to, within my science fiction world, jump between universes in the multiverse. So imagine something like Jorge Luis Borges' Garden of Forked Paths. Imagine a million science fiction tropes and movies where every move you make in a garden that branches sends you to a new place or creates some kind of state change. So in our lives, you make decisions all the time. And most of these decisions are inconsequential. I'm going to have chocolate ice cream or vanilla, or I'm going to take a vacation day or a health and wellness day and not go to work. Now, most of these decisions won't change your whole life. But if you decide moments before a blind date that you're tired and you don't want to do this date and you'd never see this person, or you go forward with the date, there's a branch. You walk left, the tree branch is left, and you don't go on this date, and the tree branch is right, and you do go on the date. You go on the date, and you end up marrying that person and dedicating 20 years of your life to a family that you might not even have anticipated. Well, that one decision was a major branching point and what scientists call the collapse of the wave function at that point literally sent you, in this sense, to a different universe. So the garden is a metaphorical, and you'll see it later in the book series, actual physical terminus. It's like a train station in the form of a garden with branching paths, where people who walk in the garden, every move they make collapses the wave function at that point and sends them into a different universe. Now, Alice is just hanging out there in the middle of nothing. And with enough time and enough space, anything is possible. And the first big breakthrough for Alice after 10 to the 23 years, I don't know, I'm just making it up. She stumbles into the garden, which means that she's no longer isolated. She could travel anywhere she wants in the Infiniverse, in this multiverse. And then she does so. And as I relate, even in this opening, it's like Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. At first, she's amazed by this wild place where everything is interesting and different, and there are different regions and characters, and she's fascinated and wants to ask questions. And everyone seems so cool until they scorn her. Why? Because Alice has never interacted with any other sentient being. She's got no etiquette. She doesn't know how groups function, and her imagination's been vivid, and she's been exploring every possibility. But in terms of her personality, she doesn't know. And then she's rejected, and then she's really pissed off, and then she turns back into herself. And then what? Well, she self-isolates, she broods for another what? 10 to the 23 years, I don't know. Unimaginable amounts of time. She's just hauling ass in that dead universe until, with equal random luck, she stumbles across the emergence equations. And now these are awesome. Another science fiction trope, but this is my version of it. Max Tegmark is a Swedish physicist. He's, I think, at MIT, and he's known for a bunch of stuff. But what he was really known for, going all the way back to the 90s, was his multiverse stuff. He was one of the first physicists to seriously consider it and talk about it and use his imagination to describe it. He had 4 levels, and I'm going to devote another whole podcast just to this. But level 1 is our universe that just goes on forever. And since it goes on forever, things are bound to just keep repeating because it's going to run out of stuff. So in our universe, if it goes on forever, there's literally got to be an infinite number of Mookies yelling into their smartphone, talking about an infinite number of universes, because the universe, as we know it, just runs out of stuff. So it's got no choice but to repeat. And if it does this with enough time and space, just like Alice, it's going to keep repeating. That's level one. Level two is what most people consider a multiverse, that our universe is just one of an endless amount of other universes, many of which might have, most of which, all of which might have different physical constants. One universe is a big black hole, other one, the Higgs mass isn't so finely tuned, so it expands even more rapidly. Endless universes where stars cannot form, chemical reactions can never happen. Endless universes where there's more antimatter than matter. Maybe time runs backwards compared to our own. Who knows? Endless universes where matter doesn't even form, and maybe they're four-dimensional spatial universes, maybe two-dimensional ones. So that's level two for Max Tegmark. Level three is every collapse of the wave function splits each of these universes, or just our own universe, which is an extrapolation of Everett's many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics. To me, that's like a combination of level two with level four, in a sense. And level four is the essence of everything. The essence of reality itself is mathematics. And Tegmark describes that you have a subject like botany or psychology, and there's a lot of words. And then you have a subject like particle physics, and it's mostly math. So the closer you get to the essence of describing the universe, the more mathematical it gets. And he makes the wild leap to assert that the essence of reality itself is mathematical, which is super cool. There's a lot of other reasons. So I assume in Jonnie Fazoolie, you're tracking me so far, you having fun? I'm assuming that in Jonnie Fazoolie and the Transfinite Reality Engine, the world that I have created here in my science fiction book, we live, us, me, you, this podcast, my book, in a level four Tegmark multiverse, which means that mathematics, or something like mathematics, and this will be a subject that I tackle later in the books too, something like mathematics is the foundation of reality itself. So there's some kind of absurdist conclusions that, the square root of 2, the irrational square root of 2, is a thing and it exists like an object. Well, I don't know. We can talk about that. But this idea that the essential backbone of reality itself, I've covered that on another podcast too, is more like, we're more like playing a video game. And the essence of reality is the Xbox and the chip and the software. And how we experience reality is more like the TV monitor on which our characters run than how we perceive it in 3 dimensions and time and all that. And other folks have written about this and thought about this, and I find it fascinating. So the discrepancy between how we perceive the universe and how the universe actually is huge, is a chasm. Even the ancient Greeks recognized that. This is a scientific, philosophical, mathematical interpretation of that. And in this universe, level 4 universe, and level 4 multiverse, I should say, the essence is math. So equations, causality through these logical operators is reality. It's like the Matrix, so to speak. Only instead of it being a place that humanity is trapped in, like a computer simulation, we're talking about reality, all of reality itself. Now, I went on this tangent because Alice Void, who's sitting out there, all right, and she is so old. She's self-created. She hung out lonely and created worlds for herself, got really bored, stumbled into the garden, and then found out how to travel wherever she wanted to do, was fascinated and then rejected and then frustrated. Now she's brooding. And then in her state of consternation, renewed boredom and anger, she stumbles upon what I'm calling the emergence equations. And the emergence equations operate off this notion that if reality itself is mathematical in some kind of way, then there's these emergence equations that if you could figure out what they are and then compile them in a way that a software program and a piece of hardware compiles code, just like a computer can manipulate anything on its screen, you, as the owner and the compiler of the emergence equations, can manipulate all of reality itself. And Alice has stumbled onto the emergence equations. She calls them the builder numbers. Why? Because she's just the avatar of a 7-year-old Victorian girl. That's why. She's not going to call them emergence equations. She can't even pronounce them. She'll just say I have the builder numbers. That's what she says. And lo and behold, she's got them. Alice has the builder numbers. And she proves it. How? By deleting entire universes. Why? Because she wants something. What does she want? Alice wants. Here's Alice, okay? She's all powerful. Why? Because she can travel the garden and she's got the emergence equations. Okay. What does she want? Well, she's explored the multiverse and she has stumbled upon the biggest moron around and wants him. Why would Alice want the biggest fool in the multiverse? Well, I describe it from the opening line of the book. She has everything and she wants what she can't have, and she can't have him because he's a moron, can't even appreciate her. And she knows that he's a challenge, and that's what she wants. But she could just grab him by want of her power, but that's not the fun of it. She wants him to need her. And this is an analog for so much of so many relationships that I've been in, both ends of this equations, relationships that you could probably relate to, wanting the one that you can't have, the person who's being desired doesn't desire the other person and then makes the other person crazy and makes that other person want them even more. It hints at the true nature, or at least an expression of love, which is this yearning desire. Life's bitter mystery, as the Irish poets and writers have alluded to. So Alice, all powerful, wants a moron, wants the person whom I'm calling the unlikely and ignorant Prometheus of the human race. And now, who would that be? That is Jonnie Fazoolie. Yes, sirree. Alice Void, Boltzmann brain, out of all the creatures in the infinite multiverse, has chosen one of reality's biggest losers and morons, and she is manipulating all of reality to get him to need her. That to me is awesome. And it's awesome because I am bringing together the two most extreme kind of forces. It's like those videos on Instagram where someone takes a ball of molten lead and they drop it on an ice cube, right? And then you get steam and then you get this phase shift. Whenever you bring extreme opposites together in art, things pop. And I wanted to write the Lover's Guide to the Infiniverse. And I thought to myself, why go halfway if the stakes of my science fiction book are reality itself, and I'm writing a book about lovers? then why not bring an all-powerful, omnipotent, omniscient being and have this being desire the most foolish and stupid mortal? Again, molten lead dropped into an ice bucket. Boom! And that's what this book is all about. So, in summary, and I know I've reached the point where I'm going to have to extend this spoiler into multiple episodes. Why not? Suffice to say that Jonnie Fazoolie and the Transfinite Reality Engine is an all-powerful, all-knowing Boltzmann brain who wants Jonnie Fazoolie, con man, hustler, moron, to love her. And everything that here's the thing, this will help. So if you just listen to this podcast and then go back to the book or forget you even knew me, the one takeaway of this annotation, which will help understanding the book if you didn't realize it for yourself or I did an insufficient job of getting you there, is that Alice is manipulating all the characters and situations in the book, starting with book 1, to get Jonnie Fazoolie to build a device through which he can enter the Infiniverse so that she can better play with him and coax him to her. And now that will help explain many of the ensuing scenes. Now, Alice has a signature, and what that signature is what I'm describing as the childlike lullaby. As described in the first section, Alice wanting Jonnie, and initially here it's not self-evident who or what she wants, but she sends out. She is a physical being, remember? She's out there in a dying universe, accelerating into oblivion, but she has these amazing powers by want of just existing for so long. And she sends out a quantum signal, which means that it's instantaneous. It's not limited by the speed of light. And in this case, it's not even limited by the boundaries between universes. She sends out a signal, a transmission throughout all of reality. Every universe, every possible universe, all of reality, capital R. Because she has the emergence equation, she's able to do this. She sends out a signal which comes through as a childlike lullaby with deep reverb and tremolo. And it beckons for what? A defiant reply. It's a message for Jonnie. But it's really a message for the powers that be to bring Jonnie to her. And that italicized 3-line paragraph that I center in the text is Alice announcing herself to you, the reader, and to the characters in that scene in the book. And she appears several times in the narrative in various forms. She appears as the product of the scientists' demonstration of the evolution of Boltzmann brains. She appears as the avatar of a Boltzmann brain with this lullaby playing. She appears on a New York subway in the form of an EDM tune, which actually inspired this idea of it being a lullaby. Year Zero by Andy Moore. And I could play a clip too on this podcast. I'll do that. It's just a mesmerizing EDM tune that I heard while working out that I thought captured this feeling of childishness and power. So she sends out this signal. This signal has expressions in all these different forms. And like a Wagnerian character, where there's a sequence of notes or a melody associated with it's an operatic kind of device, right? Dun 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 dun. That is who? That is Tristan. That's Isolde. That's whomever the fuck. Well, you get this lullaby, and it's Alice, and she appears in the car that crashes the taxi with Penny. She appears in the conference demonstration. She appears in Jonnie's dreams. That's the signal. And most significantly, perhaps for this part of the narrative, she appears as a viral computer hack in the jar of the scientist, through which she ransoms reality itself and summons the stewards who watch over the Infiniverse to meet her demands by solving her riddles. That's the essential setup of the whole series that describes the first section, like who the hell is Alice Unchained? And it sets up some of the mechanism in the book, which might have been confusing or ambiguous. And I haven't even really gotten to the plot yet, now have I? So anyway, I'll drop another podcast where I'll continue into part 2 and likely part 3 of this spoiler guide to my novel. And if nothing else, I hope you enjoyed this as much as I have. I'm at the hour mark almost. And Substack hasn't been letting me post longer than an hour, and I probably shouldn't post longer than an hour because I have things to do and you have things to do. And an hour is a decent little chunky length of time. And then I can do the to be continued, and if nothing else, as long as I'll keep breathing, I'll keep ranting, and it'll just be indefinitely continued. So consider this just another speed bump in your patience with me. Thanks for listening. Like, comment, share. More to come. I'm going to get into, now that I set up the essential foundation of the novel in a broad strokes kind of way, I'll show you how Alice manipulates the characters to ultimately lead Jonnie to develop the device. Because without Alice's intervention, at least in this universe, Jonnie probably wouldn't have got there. They need help. And Alice kind of coaxes the infinite possibilities into a finite pathway that ultimately leads Jonnie Fazoolie to design and develop and deploy the Transfinite reality engine. More to come.